Hey everyone, and welcome to Boston Autoblog. If you are new here, this is my 2019 Volkswagen GTI Rabbit Edition. Normally on this channel, we do car reviews and quick buyer's guides to help you find the right car for you. But for my long-term subscribers, you've probably been waiting for an update on this GTI because the last time this car was featured on the channel, I had dropped in a cold air intake and I said I was going to modify it more. Well, plans kind of changed and I haven't done anything to this car in almost a year. And in this video, I want to go over everything, whether it's the maintenance cost, what it's like to live with and drive on a daily basis, what it's been like to put on 42,000 miles on this car, and also if I have any long-term plans for the GTI and if I am going to keep it for another year or two. Also, for some of you who are looking at buying a Mark 7 or 7.5 GTI, you've come to the right place because I gotta be honest, I would not recommend going with a Mark 8, especially with the prices as high as they are. But also, I want to get into all the positives of owning a Mark 7 or 7.5 GTI, and I'll get into some of the negatives as well. So without wasting any further time, let's dive right into this video. So let's begin this video with the most important aspect for the Volkswagen GTI, and that is, what is it like to live with on a daily basis? I have discussed at great lengths about the driving dynamics and how I recommend this car when it comes to being an enthusiast and you're looking for a fun little hatchback that is relatively affordable. But what about the other details, such as the fuel efficiency, the practicality, the things that you're going to start noticing weeks, months, and years after buying this car? Because if you are like me and you keep your GTI stock, you're eventually going to get numb to the driving experience and what this car is offering, I'd say within the first year to year and a half. Now, that was all my decision making. I didn't want to have extra expenses being a business owner. I didn't want to spend $1,200 on a tune or an exhaust or even some of the smaller expenses such as lowering springs or a rear sway bar. Now, some of you are going to say, well, Mike, I mean, how much of an enthusiast are you really? I mean, why didn't you really customize this car and personalize it? And it really just came down to the fact that this is my daily driver and I'd rather keep this car as reliable as possible. However, for myself, I still find myself smiling and giggling a bit on some winding back roads because for a daily driver, I think this is the best car out there for the price. I really do. At around $30,000, I just don't think you can find anything better. Now, Hyundai Veloster N and Honda Civic Si owners will definitely dispute that claim, but I find the GTI to be perfect for what I use it for. And this leads me into that practicality and fuel efficiency. For myself, I get around 28 to 32 miles per gallon per day, and I'm usually driving in the suburbs and on the highway. I don't really do a lot of city driving. I don't go into Boston that often, so I do notice that when I am in the city, that MPG number tends to drop to around 25, which really isn't that bad for a car like this. Also, this car gives me more than enough space for all my camera gear when I do go to the dealerships to film reviews, and that was one of the motivational factors that came into play into buying this car. But I'm definitely going to admit that up until late June of this year, I was ready to move on from the GTI. I was bored of it, I was tired of it, and I wanted something a bit more upscale, luxurious, a bit more powerful, and that's really because I do a lot of reviews. I film Audis, BMWs, sometimes Ferraris and Aston Martins, and you can definitely get caught up in finding things that you hate about the car you drive and you want something a bit better. But the ultimate test for this car was to go out to Watkins Glen this year for the 6 hours of the Glen. I'm a huge IMSA racing fan. I wanted to see the prototypes. I wanted to see the Porsche Carrera Cup and also Lamborghini Super Trofeo. And this was a great opportunity, not only for me as a motorsport fan, but also to see if I had any connection left with this GTI. This was going to be an opportunity for me to see if this car had any weaknesses, if there was anything better out there on the market that I could justify upgrading to. Because prior to that trip, I wanted to upgrade to an SQ5 or an X3 M40i just because I wanted that extra practicality and interior spacing, just because I was going to have people along with me for the journey. But to my surprise, my connection to this GTI strengthened during that 5.5 hour drive, because I was able to load up all the luggage and my camera gear, and it really didn't feel claustrophobic in here. And also, I wasn't getting tired, I wasn't getting worn out. I probably could have continued on driving for a couple more hours. And to me, this GTI really showed that it really is a grand tour. That's what the GTI stands for. And I was like, you know what? I think there's actually some hope here in keeping the GTI and saving my money for something better down the road. This also leads me into the fuel efficiency and the fuel economy, where on a 5.5 hour drive, I did about 32.5 miles per gallon. And if you know the geography of New England and the Northeast, that's all uphill driving heading out to Watkins Glen. So to do 32.5 miles per gallon with extra weight, I was really impressed with that. Then, of course, I think also with the economy the way it is, gas prices the way they are, is upgrading to a car with a V6 or V8 really the smartest decision on my part? If I'm too afraid to modify this hatchback, am I going to enjoy going to the pump 2 or 3 times a week? Probably not. I do believe that for myself, that trip was filled with memories, and to explore new roads and to just get away from everything for that weekend, I think is what really built a connection to this car that I didn't have prior. What really impressed me was how comfortable the ride quality was, even for such a long period of time being behind the wheel with the sports tuned suspension, and also going down roads in upstate New York that did have some bumps and imperfections. It's definitely not all smooth sailing out that way, and especially up here in New England, it's not like that at all. But for that 5.5 hour drive, or 3 years behind the wheel of this car, I haven't gotten to the point where I'm like, I want something a bit more comfortable. I want an adaptive suspension. I want a car that feels a bit more luxurious. I just haven't gotten to that point yet from a daily driver perspective. And that's why I feel this car is flawless. If you are trying to live within your means and on a very strict budget, for a car at around $30,000, I just don't see anything else that's out there. Even for a car at around $40,000 or $50,000, I think the logical upgrade would be to go with an S4 or S5 Sportback. But then it comes back to the fuel economy, where I just don't know if I could live with a V6 at this point in time and having to spend a premium at the pump. That's where I think the GTI is really showing its value and worth to me, and why I think ultimately I've not sold this car or moved on at this period of time. However, after 3 years of ownership, you are going to notice some of the negatives and the downsides. And one of them is the 7-speed DSG. You're probably going to say, well, why didn't you go with the 6-speed manual? But that's not the point I'm making here. Pre-facelift GTIs came with the 6-speed DSG, and I felt that that transmission was far superior to the 7-speed. Now, I understand why Volkswagen dropped in an extra gear, probably for better fuel economy, but the 6-speed just shifted so much better. The gear ratios, I think, really fit this car and fit its sporty personality, whereas the 7-speed DSG, at times it can get a bit infuriating, especially gears 1, 2, and 3, where it's very clunky. But also, I've talked to other GTI owners with the 7-speed, and it holds on to second gear a bit too long, and that's where I kind of get a bit frustrated, even in third gear, where if you're driving around 30 to 35 miles per hour, and maybe you're behind a slower driver, it just holds on to either gears 2 and 3, and you feel the need to drop it into manual and get into fourth gear. And that's why I think I'd rather have that 6-speed. But outside of that, I think when it comes to the mechanical side, I'm not going to sit here and fault the GTI any further. And then one minor gripe that I have with the GTI, which really didn't become noticeable to me until this year, going out to Watkins Glen, but also to Lime Rock a few times when I had passengers on board with me, was that we only have one USB input, and my passengers want to charge out their phones, and they can't. Now, I probably should have a 12-volt adapter with me for such occasions, but I do wish that there was one USB outlet for the second row. And then as an enthusiast, I could probably say, well, I wish the GTI was faster, or it had a better sounding exhaust, or maybe it could handle better. But again, that's all things that I can fix, and really, with this car being my daily driver, I'm just not willing to throw in the money. But also, I could always get a second car if need be. Now let's move on to annual maintenance, which seems to be getting more expensive with each passing year. Starting off with the oil changes, Volkswagen recommends to come in every 10,000 miles, but I usually change my oil every 3,000 to 5,000 miles. And at my local dealership, that costs me about 80 bucks. So on average, I'm spending about $260 to over $300 per year on oil changes alone. But my biggest expense is the 10,000 mile updates, which is really just fluid changes. Also, they do a multi-point inspection for the interior and exterior to check for any wear and tear. But it does become a bit more technical as you start adding on the miles on your GTI. So my local dealership, it first started out with a charge of $199, then $299, $399, and $499, and I'm pretty sure once I get to around 60,000 miles, it's going to be close to $1,000 because the last time I went, it was around 900 bucks, which also included the changing of the spark plugs and also a fuel injector flush. Now, I'm glad I did do that maintenance because I was going on a longer road trip just a few days later, and I wanted to have that peace of mind, but also Volkswagen recommends to do those spark plug changes every 40,000 miles or every 4 years. And while not part of my annual maintenance charges, I do want to say this for full transparency, that I did change the tires last year to the Michelin Pilot 4S All Seasons, which cost me about $1,100 at my local tire shop. And I gotta be honest, it was the best money ever spent on this car in my 3 years of ownership because it changed up the driving dynamics, it diminished the road noise, and I find the ride comfort to be far better than the Bridgestones that came equipped with this car from the factory. So all in all, I would say at this point in time, the Volkswagen GTI is going to cost me about $1,500 to maintain this year alone. But there are some more maintenance costs looming in the near future because I do have a DSG. So since I just passed 40,000 miles, I probably need to go in for another oil change for the transmission. Then I also will need to change up the pads and rotors at some point, probably closer to 60,000 miles, and maybe even the calipers if I plan on keeping this car for a longer period of time. Now getting into some of the modifications that I've done to the GTI, which this list is not very long at all. Last year I dropped in a cold air intake from APR, which cost me about $500. I definitely recommend doing this if you are an enthusiast and you want to have a bit more engagement and fun when you are accelerating. You get a lot of turbo noises, and it's definitely something that has been worth the price in my opinion. An add-on expense that I think was well worth the price is the ceramic tints, which is legal for Massachusetts, and it cost me about $500. I think this car looks a lot better than it did before, and it really makes this car look a bit more lower profile, but also I love the fact that I don't have as much sunlight coming into the car and making me feel as though I'm driving a fish tank. And lastly, before we continue on, the 2019 Volkswagen GTI has a factory warranty of 6 years and 72,000 miles, which is one of the reasons why I didn't extensively modify this car since it is my daily driver. Now, some dealers may void your warranty with a cold air intake. My dealership hasn't done that to me. Also, if you have a Volkswagen deal that is APR certified, you can get a stage 1 tune, which is basically a low torque tune. It's not the full stage 1, and that is one way to get the most out of your car without voiding that warranty. And finally, where do I go from here? After putting on over 42,000 miles in 3 years of ownership, do I plan on keeping this car for another 3 years and putting on an additional 42,000 miles? Or do I finally decide to modify this car and to personalize it? I think the logical decision is to keep the GTI until the warranty expires. So that's another 30,000 miles down the road. I think that would be about maybe an additional 2 years of ownership. When it comes to modifications, since the GTI is my only car and my daily driver, I just don't want to give up that reliability. I don't want to pour in money for unnecessary add-ons. And unless I get something else where I have a second car or I find a new daily, I think the GTI is going to remain the way it is. Even though I put it in that cold air intake, it gave me a small taste of what I can do with this car. I think I need to stay responsible right now and keep it the way it is. But who knows? Maybe if I find something else that I can use as a daily, maybe I decide to really push this car and see where I can go with it. But I think at this point in time, I'm very happy with what this car has given me, and I have absolutely no complaints, which is why I do believe after 42,000 miles, after 3 years, this car right here is flawless. It's the best car I could have purchased back in 2019, and I still believe that today in 2022. And if you are looking at buying a Mark 7 or 7.5, I highly recommend it. I think it's the best decision you can make, and really I think it's one of the best cars ever made. And I know I sound like a typical Volkswagen owner now, but I've definitely experienced what this car has to offer, and I can truly appreciate what Volkswagen has done with this hatchback. So guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe for more. Also make sure to follow me on Instagram at Boston Autoblog so you can see what I'm up to and what vehicles I'll be featuring in the future. And I will see you guys next time.